Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from websites such as theathletic.com. He is useful human Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing really well. I just came back from Revival, having dinner with an old friend. So I missed most of the Thursday night game, but I caught the end of it, and that's all that matters.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I watched most of the beginning and into the third quarter and watched Aaron Rodgers carve into that defense like a roast. I was like, oh, yeah, that's one of the touchdown passes. You just sat there and went, I don't know how the defender was that far behind the receiver, but okay. And it's as is the case usually in the middle of the season for Green Bay, it was a receiver I'd never heard of and will likely never hear from again. But for
right.
One moment, Aaron Rodgers made that receiver God.
Yeah, I mean, so like I've picked up in one of my dynasty leagues all of the Packers receivers. So I've got except for Devonta Adams, right? So I've got Geronimo Allison, Equanimeous St. Brown, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and then I saw a notification on my phone while I was eating, and it was Robert Tonyan caught a touchdown. I was like, what the hell?
I think that was the one.
Yeah, how do they keep finding? Justice Mosqueda tells me he's among the blocking tight ends, he's the third stringer. So cool. That was very predictable. A 57-yarder or whatever.
Yeah. That catch was just dumb. You just watched it and went, I don't understand how the defender was that far behind you, but okay. And with that, welcome to this edition of Norse Code. We are going to preview the Bears with a special guest. We've actually had him on before, Lorin Cox of Cox Sports 1. He is the host of Locked On Bears and contributor for NBC Sports Chicago. Lorin's an awesome guest, so we'll be talking about the Bears in just a moment. And of course, we'll be talking about the mailbag. Before we start, we just want to thank everyone for listening and for donating in the past. We enjoy being ad-free, and we'll actually be talking about that in just a moment. But we wanted to thank specifically a new Patreon donation from Matthew Merkins. Thank you, Matthew. Again, really do appreciate it. If you would like to donate to the show, you can do so in one of two different ways. You can go to paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can go to patreon.com. Patreon? Did I do it again? Damn it.
You did it again.
Patreon.com/
Big fan of the New England Patriots.
The Patriots are awesome. My personal favorite. We're going to start covering them. I think they're an XFL team. Patreon.com/NorseCode. And that's more of a subscription based. You can do any amount of money you'd like per month. $1, $3.50 a month to help keep Loch Ness Monster at bay. Whatever you'd like. And if you donate to the show via Patreon and are an active participant of Patreon up until, I think, December 1st, is going to be the cutoff for this, you will receive a new Christmas episode. You'll receive a Christmas episode that is not going to be published through the regular feed. So there's going to be 2 episodes this year, one of which is just for Patreon subscribers. Hey, I did it without trying that time. Great.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I'm on a roll now. I can't wait to see how I mess this up. So, again, if you would like to donate, patreon.com/NorseCode, or you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode and donate there. So, the ad thing. I sent a message out to our Patreon subscribers earlier, I believe yesterday, just to kind of give a little bit of a update as to what's going on. As you guys are aware, we are hosted on the Daily Norseman website. And as with every other SB Nation site, the Daily Norseman, because it's associated with the Vikings, SB Nation would like to put the podcasts that are going to be hosted on their websites kind of in their own little separate feed. As a result of them doing this, and they've done this for just about every NFL team. I think the Vikings were one of the last ones to launch. They started in Philadelphia, I believe. As a result, this would change a few things as to how the podcasts are listened to on the website. How you receive it, it would remain the same. You'd still be getting it through iTunes or something like that. But there would be ads placed in the beginning, at the end, and in the middle of episodes, usually about 20 or 30 minutes in. And the people who have those podcasts are actually able to decide where those ads go. So why am I telling you this? We're trying to decide whether or not we should go with ads. This is actually a form of a monetization for us, but we are trying to decide whether or not this is something that we should be interested in. And as listeners of Norse Code, we are looking to you for your opinion. We would like to know, is this something that would cause you to stop listening to the show? Stop donating, for example? Is this something that, tell us your horror stories? What we can tell you is that the audio quality will not change from what you're hearing right now. This is, I say pristine, but this is very good audio quality. That will not change, unlike the last time that we did ads. When the audio quality was terrible and the ads were just inserted randomly, and sometimes the episode was completely lost as a result. That wouldn't happen in this case. So we've been told. But if you have a strong opinion, please go to your email and go to and just send us an email at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com, or you can tweet us. You can do at norsecodedn. You can also harass Arif on Twitter, just like everybody else does.
Classic.
Exactly. Arif is trying to send out funny tweets right now. So, but anyway, if you have a strong opinion, please, we are looking for information from you guys. We're looking for feedback on this. No decision has been made, but if we want to stay on the Norseman, we would need to have ads on the page. So, and we've been on the Norseman for over 5 years now. So this would represent a change.
Right.
So, if you have a strong opinion, please send us an email at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com or tweet us at norsecodedn. And if we get a bunch of responses, I'll even send out some swag. I did pick up something special from when I visited Dusty that I'm waiting for the right moment to send it out. For like the right comment. I think I sent you a picture of it, and your response included, "Oh my god!"
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I do want to add that so we've already gotten a number of responses. It's pretty great. People who feel strongly are the kind of people that very often have like one version of the opinion but not the other. So we actually do want to hear from people who, maybe this doesn't impact you at all. Maybe you'd be okay with ads. Maybe you'd still be patrons or whatever. We want to hear about that too, so that we don't get kind of like a skewed sample from people that are writing in. But we've already gotten a bunch of great responses. It's already kind of forming our kind of strategy from here on out, because we're still kind of trying to decide, if this is the best path to move forward. If it's not, it's not. If it is, it is. And so we're going to keep maintain the same level of quality. It's just really a question of jumping onto that platform. What would end up happening is, you wouldn't have to change your behavior at all. You would still receive from the same RSS feed, the same subscription feed, the podcast, plus, whoever else has been added. And we've been in discussions with kind of who that would be, but whoever else has been added to that, what is now a Daily Norseman podcast feed. So with all of those changes in mind, just please give us feedback, because it would really kind of help us decide whether or not, this would be the right move for us and for you.
Yeah. And we've been doing a DIY approach with this ever since the ad thing went so horribly the first time. I don't believe that the ad thing would necessarily go horribly wrong the second time, which isn't to say we've made a decision, but the indications we've received would be that this would not be a repeat of the horror of 4 years ago. That said, we enjoy being ad-free. So just give us a message, let us know one way or another, or if you're kind of in the middle, you go, okay, well, but we want to hear from you guys. So we're going to keep this open for about a week or so. Just send us a message, let us know. And let's move on from this and talk about some Bears. Let's talk about the game. And we're going to be talking with Lorin Cox at Cox Sports 1 on Twitter. He is the host of Locked On Bears and a contributor for NBC Sports Chicago. Let's go to the interview you conducted earlier today.
All right, yeah, so we got Lorin Cox on from the Locked On Bears podcast. He also covers the Bears for, was it NBC Sports Chicago or something like that? Is that right?
Yes.
All right, yeah. So, yeah, he thinks professionally about the Bears for a living. I think it's what we agreed to say about his qualifications. And so we get to talk to him about the NFC North leading Bears, who will put that title at stake this Sunday night. It's a primetime game at Soldier Field. So it's going to be a pretty exciting game. I don't think I recall a time in recent history when both of these teams were this qualified to have a good game in a long time. What about you?
Yeah, I think it goes back well before and maybe I'm revealing my age, but well before my memory of Bears Vikings matchups. But yeah, it's a pretty pivotal matchup, I think, for both teams. Certainly for the Bears, as kind of a real barometer here of, okay, is this for sure a team that can win this division, or are they still maybe a step behind the top class of the NFC North here? This is the real test where everything gets a little bit more legit for the Bears.
Yeah, no, it seems like they're kind of at that threshold for that question, right? Because, I mean, you take a look at sort of the raw statistics. They're fourth, I think, in points allowed, fifth in points for, wonky bye week stuff. Maybe that changes kind of the numbers. But generally speaking, they're like, I think a top 5 team in DVOA. So it seems like, from like, you take a look at point differential, you take a look at opponent adjusted point differential, which we'll talk about the schedule the Bears have faced in a bit. But I mean, they're sixth, I think, in opponent adjusted point differential. So there seems to be some feeling here that the Bears are a legitimate team, but no one's talking about them like, that they're like the Rams, the Chiefs, or some people are talking about the Steelers as part of that conversation too. What do you think the kind of the fan base in Chicago feels about the strength of this team? Do you think they think that the Bears have kind of arrived, that they're just kind of newly minted as a top tier team?
Yeah, the fan base is definitely full on top tier team, playoff push, NFC North crown competing Bears roster. And I think this Vikings game for me will go a long way towards shaping my overall opinion of just how good this team is. I do think, nationally, the Bears are still a bit underrated. I don't think they've gotten quite as much respect, particularly defensively, as they deserve for what they've really been able to do. And, offensively, they put up pretty good statistics, even when sometimes the Trubisky performances, which I'm sure we'll get into here in a little bit, don't necessarily match what the box score always tells you. But they've played some pretty tough games, and you look at even their losses. It's lost by 1 point to the Packers in week 1, lost by 3 to the Dolphins in overtime, which still isn't a good loss by any means, and then a 7-point loss to the Patriots where they had a Hail Mary be tackled at the 1 yard line just outside the end zone. So they've played every single team extremely close this year, although, again, as I think we're also getting into, it hasn't necessarily been the toughest slate of opponents.
Right, yeah, so let's actually talk about that. So some pretty top tier opponents in the schedule, right? You got the New England Patriots, right? You've got the Seattle Seahawks, who, if I'm going to backslide a little bit, I will say that I don't think the Seahawks of week 2 are the Seahawks that we're seeing now. So, maybe that's not fair. But just in terms of, you got some top slate opponents. You've got, maybe you could count the Green Bay Packers because, for most of the game, right, Rodgers was in. So you've got like 3 opponents that you'd say are probably pretty top tier. But then you've got people that are just populating the bottom of the power rankings. You've got the Cardinals, the Buccaneers, the Dolphins with Brock Osweiler specifically, the Bills, of course. People are kind of torn on kind of where near the bottom the Jets are, but they're certainly not, I think, an above-average team by any reasonable stretch of the imagination. Then the Lions, who have just kind of given up on the season. So it feels like a lot of weak opponents, some high-level opponents, and against the high-level opponents. It's a 1-point game against the Packers, right? It's a win against the Seahawks. It's a 1-possession game, I guess, if we want to be generous. Against the Patriots. So it feels like against maybe the good opponents, they've kind of shown out, but a lot of it just seems to be like beating up on, and not even beating up sometimes, like a loss to the Miami Dolphins, right? Just like a slate of these really bottom tier teams. Do you have a sense that they've played an average team?
It's a weird dynamic with this schedule because certainly when you bring it up amongst the diehard Bears fans, the immediate defense as well, they have no control over their schedule, so you can't knock them for having played bad teams. But at the same time, when you're trying to compare them to the Minnesota Vikings, who have played the Rams, and did they also play the Patriots as well?
Not the Patriots yet, but they have
not the Patriots yet. Yeah. But they've played some.
And I would say the Garoppolo 49ers team is maybe above average, maybe.
Yeah. So that's kind of when the argument comes up when you're comparing teams and trying to say, well, who have they beat? And that's really again why this Vikings matchup is so important. That the Bears have kind of lost their biggest matchups against their toughest opponents, and they were close in all of them. And they got back on track against some bad teams, and maybe some bad teams played them even a little bit closer than you might like to think. But at this point, a lot of what's been going on with this Bears team feels like exceeding expectations and overachieving, and that they weren't necessarily supposed to be the NFC North leaders in year one under Matt Nagy and Mitchell Trubisky's first year in the offense. So, it's I think fans can enjoy it while it lasts and ride as much of the optimism as possible. And like we've been saying, I think this Vikings game will be the test that says, okay, have the Bears just been playing bad teams, or are they really ready to compete with some of a Super Bowl contender in the NFC North?
Yeah, right. So let's break it down kind of at a more granular level. I think the more interesting discussion is on the defense, so we'll wait on that. We'll keep the listeners kind of waiting, or I guess they can fast forward to the podcast. But we'll talk first, I think, about the offense, and there are some pretty intriguing questions there too. Especially, I think there's an open question, like you said, about kind of Mitch Trubisky, who something like 9th or 10th in the NFL in passer rating, and like we said earlier, I mean the Bears are like 4th or something, in top 5 in points scored. So the offense is producing, but also kind of like something you've alluded to, Trubisky has the widest gulf between, say, Pro Football Focus grade, who they don't really particularly care about kind of the outcome in terms of production. They care about kind of how we've arrived at the outcome. And so they'll grade an interceptable pass as if it were an interception, and they'd grade, a drop as if it were a reception, and like passer rating, where he's like 9th. Like Trubisky's at kind of one of the bottom quarterbacks in PFF grade, one of the top quarterbacks ish in QBR, adjusted net yards per attempt. The more raw statistical production measures. Do you think that dynamic kind of reflects what you've been talking about? How maybe the performance on film isn't quite matching? Do you think Pro Football Focus is too harsh? Do you think passer rating is overstating things? Kind of what's your breakdown?
Well, as a Pro Football Focus employee, I will.
I'm sorry.
I will admit a potential conflict of interest in. No, I mean, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I tend to agree pretty closely with the PFF grades for his game performances. I mean, what it signals to me is how effective the scheme has been at creating open receivers, creating open throws, and for the most part, you'll see Trubisky even in his, what I would consider his poorer games, he'll hit some nice throws, like some legit NFL caliber downfield, over the top deep throws to Taylor Gabriel or Allen Robinson, and those are the nice building block plays. But a lot of what we had seen for the majority of the season is, the quick dump off to the flat, the crossing route over the middle, the running back out of the backfield, I think was Trubisky's most targeted route through the first, 6 or 7 weeks of the season. And a lot of curl routes too. I mean, just Allen Robinson runs 6 yards, turns around, and Trubisky hits him on a 3-step drop. And we saw just that over and over and over again, and mixed in with some inaccurate throws where he's just missing open receivers or he's putting the ball in harm's way. And over the course of a game, the positive throws don't really add up to the negative throws, and so many of them are kind of the neutral, easy throws that you can kind of see where the PFF grade comes from. Even when the neutral, the curl routes, it works for high completion percentage and pretty good yards, and obviously some touchdowns in there as well. So, but the thing is, what started to change was last week against the Detroit Lions, and that's why I'm curious about how this Vikings game is going to be, because Trubisky had the big breakout against the Buccaneers where he had like 350 yards and 5 touchdowns and just torched what was probably the worst defense in the NFL at that point, and maybe still is. But it didn't last. It wasn't a turning point, and comes back against the Dolphins and struggles a little bit. But last week against the Lions, it felt a little bit different in the way that he performed. It looked like he had just this next level confidence in the scheme, a better understanding of the offense. And, I talk about the quick throws and the dump offs that he took. You saw him get further in his progressions and take the more difficult throws in his route concepts. I think, he was hitting slants more than the flats, and he was hitting, the corner route on some different spacing concepts instead of just hitting the curl route. And it seemed to be key development in that area that could signal to me a little bit more of a true step forward than an anomaly. But certainly there are still a lot of areas of weakness in his game. And I think the Vikings present not a great matchup for him, particularly when it comes to how Mike Zimmer likes to blitz and use those double A gap looks.
So I think kind of one drive that from last week's game that might encapsulate kind of this tension between Is he a growing quarterback? Is he well represented with that statistics? How much, does the scheme matter? And, is he, throwing? I think in the first quarter with like 5 minutes left on the clock, ended up taking 4 minutes and 30 seconds. There was this drive where he's got a 27-yard pass completion to Allen Robinson, a 20-yard completion to Ben Braunecker, and then a 36-yard touchdown to Allen Robinson to end it. With a couple of passes in between, an incomplete and negative 5-yard completion, and that drive I feel like captures a lot of kind of the Rorschach test that Trubisky might be, because I look at that drive, I see this incredible throw, especially that first one to Allen Robinson, perfectly placed, seam throw, well read, everything you kind of want in an aggressive downfield throw from a quarterback. And then I'm also looking at this Ben Braunecker throw and the other Allen Robinson throw, and I'm thinking, a lot of defenses might be able to intercept that pass. I don't know that those were necessarily good throws. They were just kind of good outcomes. But I know that there's going to be other people who, are smarter than me, have like a legitimate claim to say that, no, those were actually good throws. Those throws were in the right spot, or you got to trust your receivers or whatever. I don't know if you remember the drive I'm talking about, but you kind of understand the concept I'm getting across where, Trubisky is benefiting from the lowest drop rate in the league. It seems like to me that he's throwing, and again, it's like a soft word, but it seems like to me he's throwing more interceptable passes than not, even in this game against the Lions, who I think might be 30th in pass defense. I mean, it's getting pretty rough for them too. That there were situations where I think another defense in that same scenario might have taken advantage of him. Is that maybe fair? Am I reading? Because I'm a Trubisky hater, right? So am I reading too much into it, or do you kind of see where I'm coming from?
Yeah, with that drive, for some reason I can't remember the first Robinson throw, but I remember the Braunecker and then the touchdown. And yeah, the Braunecker one was kind of on a scramble drill, which is tough because everyone's kind of adjusting on the fly, and it turns into that backyard football. So that one I thought was a little bit less of a lower
sustainable,
quality,
repeatable kind of.
Well, no, I thought it was more. I thought that one was more justifiable. Whereas the touchdown to Robinson was, Robinson smokes. I think it was Snead or one of the Nevin Lawson at the line of scrimmage, and just it's streaking down the sideline. And it was still Trubisky threw kind of a bad ball where Robinson had to slow down, turn around, come back to it, almost kind of back shoulder and in the near corner of the end zone when he had a good 3 yards of separation working his way vertically downfield. So it's those kind of plays where the placement isn't perfect, but the receiver makes the play and it made it a lot more difficult than it could have been, but still a touchdown. It's those kind of things where you do wonder, against a better defense, against better cornerbacks, are those plays going to be there? And I think we've seen in a lot of games that they haven't been there.
So I was taking a look at I remember last year when the Vikings played against Jared Goff, he'd been putting up some really good numbers, but I noticed that Goff was overperforming against bad defenses, doing a better job than you'd expect even a good quarterback to do against bad defenses, underperforming against good defenses, doing a worse job than you'd expect an average quarterback to do against good defenses. And I'm sensing it's not nearly as extreme as it was for Goff last year, but I'm sensing kind of a similar thing with Trubisky, where it feels like against your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Detroit Lions, Arizona Cardinals, he's doing a much better job than you'd expect, a generically good quarterback to do. He's taking advantage of them more. 5 touchdowns, here, a great performance against the Lions there. But against some of these stronger defenses, it feels like, if you put an average quarterback in there, they might kind of produce a little bit more. Like the Buffalo Bills, for example, they allow 5.82 adjusted yards per attempt. And Trubisky threw 5.5. The Seahawks allow 6.24 in games where they're not playing Chicago. Trubisky threw 4.41, right? The Jets, I think the Jets defense is the only one where he overperformed against a good defense. Do you think that might be a signal of, maybe what it's like to be a young quarterback, or could be a signal of maybe things to come about, having such a great core around a quarterback and kind of how you can take advantage of that in some situations, but how it might, against a good defense, not shake out?
Yeah, I think what's happened with the quality of defense he's played, it has come down a lot to the pass rush, and particularly the blitz, because I know Trubisky is the lowest graded quarterback in PFF against the blitz, and I think he's also the lowest graded quarterback under pressure. I know that was the case as of a couple weeks ago, but I haven't seen the updated numbers for heading into this matchup. And so, like, when you look at his worst games and his best games, like, he struggled a lot against the Packers in week 1, and a little bit of the Patriots in week 7, and he didn't even play particularly well against the Jets in week 8. And in his worst games, and throwing the Cardinals as well, not a great performance from him. In those bad games, you saw the defenses go very heavy on the blitz, putting a lot of guys at the line of scrimmage and getting pressure on him that way. And he doesn't have great pre-snap recognition of the blitz and being able to find his hot receiver, and it forces him to, or I guess it just makes him hurry his decisions, hurry his mechanics as a result, and not only attempt poor decision-making passes, but also just miss open passes that are there. And so I think that's been kind of the key difference in his good games versus bad games. The Buccaneers hardly blitzed him at all. I think it was like, 3 out of his 40 dropbacks he was blitzed. And the Lions last week hardly blitzed him at all and played, they play a lot of man coverage, and just he was able to have time in the pocket, was able to pretty well dissect the coverage pre-snap, and not really much pressure, not really much to hurry him into his throws. So to me, that's been the biggest indicator of his success so far this season, and we haven't really seen him properly handle the blitz and pressure over the course of an entire game. You'll see plays here and there where he extends the play with his legs and beats the blitz for a nice throw, but over the course of a full game, when the blitz keeps coming and defenses really stick to it, that's when you see the mechanics and the accuracy go, and that's what I'm looking for Mike Zimmer to do. I know he's not overall the heaviest blitzer, but from what I could tell, he blitzed heavier against guys like Josh Allen, Josh Rosen, and Sam Darnold. And I think another young quarterback in this game, I would expect a lot more of those double A gap looks and bringing pressure from a lot of different places.
Yeah, I think taking a look at Zimmer's blitz history, I think on the whole he blitzes at a league average rate, but I think you're right against quarterbacks that seem more susceptible to blitz, especially younger ones. He ramps it up, and against like your Drew Breeses of the world, I think they blitzed like 6 times against Drew Brees, and it was like a 50 pass attempt game. So it evens out in the end, but I think in particular, I think you've got a good point about how we'll see that. Well, we'll kind of move forward in a second and talk about some of the other players on the roster, but first, if Trubisky has a good game against the Vikings, what does that look like? If he has a bad game against the Vikings, which you kind of already answered a little bit, but what does that look like?
It's interesting because even if he has a bad game, there haven't been a ton of, from a box score standpoint, there haven't been a ton of like actually terrible stat lines from him. I mean, he had against the Seahawks, he was 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, and the Patriots, 52% completion percentage, but still 333 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 picks. I mean, I think that's his lowest passer rating game, and that was with, again, over 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. So if he has a bad game, you're seeing him miss throws that any quarterback should make at times, just kind of randomly. It's a dump off to Jordan Howard that he sails to the sideline. It's a curl route that goes 5 yards over the receiver's head, and it's putting the ball at least in harm's way for potentially interceptable passes, even if they haven't been very much picked off at an average rate this season. But if he has a good game, it's particularly efficient. It's confidence, it's good mechanics in the pocket, mixing in some downfield throws, but still taking some of the easy stuff underneath. And a lot of plays after the catch as well from his receivers have done a lot to boost some of his numbers. And it's all about efficiency if things are going well. And if things aren't going well, it's more volume making up for some of the mistakes along the way.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about that supporting cast. So this receiver group, I think a lot of people really enjoyed, if they were a neutral observer or a Bears fan, kind of what they've been doing in the offseason and in the draft a little bit. I mean, there's always controversy about the draft, but, adding Anthony Miller in what I think the second round I thought was a pretty phenomenal move. I thought he was a first-round receiver. Allen Robinson, coveted free agent. Trey Burton, coveted free agent. Have added a lot of, and replaced, what was one of the worst receiving cores in the league with probably an underrated one, but certainly kind of in the running for being kind of like at least a top 10 in terms of depth, right? And then also you've got Taylor Gabriel, who is tied with Tariq Cohen for the most receptions on the team, I guess, which is just bizarre to me. I mean, you already kind of explained why that might be the case in a little bit, but he also gets to throw like to Tariq Cohen. So Tell me a little bit about Allen Robinson. I remember his sophomore year, breakout season with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Incredible, great touchdown total. Made Matt Harmon's career over at Yahoo Fantasy now. Is he playing like that play? I mean, because there were a lot of concerns about him after that year when he wasn't producing nearly as much, but it was Blake Bortles throwing the ball. He's not leading the team on receptions, which I think a lot of people would have expected. Did he just have a really great game last week, or is he having a really good season, but it's just not showing up in the numbers? If there are some problems, what are they? Tell me about them.
So the main thing I think obviously when Trubisky struggles, the receivers have struggled along with him because obviously that's a symbiotic relationship there.
Right.
But the biggest thing I think that has held back Robinson's numbers was just an injury he suffered. And for some reason, for the life of me, I can't remember exactly. It was, I think, an ankle, a groin injury.
Body injury of some.
It was groin, and he suffered it against the Dolphins in Week 6. Still had a pretty good game in that one, but didn't finish out the fourth quarter. Played the following game against the Patriots, but could only play for the first few quarters and had, I think, one catch in that game and just really did not look himself. And then sits out against the Bills and sits out against the Jets and the Bills 2 weeks and then comes back against the Lions 100% healthy and really, really looks strong in Detroit. I mean, his best game as a Bear so far. So, earlier on in the season, we saw he and Trubisky slowly kind of get that connection going against the Seahawks. Robinson was kind of the go-to guy in the scheme, or just they probably threw him 6 or 7 curl routes in that game, and he finished with 10 catches for 83 yards. And they were taking kind of some of the shorter underneath stuff, but he still hadn't necessarily looked fully like that 2015 Allen Robinson. But for some reason against Detroit, coming back 100% healthy, or as healthy as he's going to be at this point in the season, he looked more explosive than he looked before. He just kind of added that next level of making plays after the catch, and not just being more of a possession guy, but being able to create even more for himself. And so it felt like Detroit could be a little bit of a turning point for Allen Robinson. But again, if we're talking about a lower quality defense, we'll see how well that'll translate against the Vikings.
22 yards per reception against Detroit. 8 yards per reception against Seattle. He had 10 receptions in that game against Seattle. Is his usage pattern really as diverse as that kind of suggests? I mean, I would have expected him to essentially play like Brandon Marshall with the Bears. So and Marshall always seemed to play kind of at the sticks, a little bit further than your Jarvis Landry types, but not as far as your Taylor Gabriel types. Is he playing in every route? Is he going to every route depth, or is there a particular style and you just end up with peculiarities like that Seattle game?
Yeah, the whole Bears offense has some peculiarities there. I mean, certainly Robinson has been a curl and a vertical type guy for the most part, but this Bears offense seems to kind of go from game to game, focusing on a particular receiver in a particular matchup against the opponent. So last week it was an Allen Robinson game, and it was not a Taylor Gabriel game. I think he had 3 targets, no catches, despite being fully healthy. And the Lions were just kind of trying to take away those deep shots, and that's kind of Gabriel's bread and butter. But earlier in the season, you have Gabriel with 7 catches, 104 yards, 5 catches, 110 yards in back-to-back weeks, and just kind of these random blips of hyper efficiency. And so like early on in the season, it was a couple of Allen Robinson-focused offenses. Then in that middle part with the Bucs and the Dolphins, you got the Taylor Gabriel-focused offense where he goes off for a bunch of yards. Then I think it's the Patriots. Trey Burton had his first 100-yard game, and he kind of got the spotlight for a couple weeks. And then last week against the Lions, Anthony Miller gets his first 100-yard game. So it's like from game plan to game plan, they'll isolate a particular defender in coverage that they want to target a bunch, and usually they have a particular receiver in mind that they're going to target him with. And the only guy who's found somewhat of a consistent target load and receiving load over the course of pretty much every game is Tariq Cohen. That his matchups with linebackers out of the backfield are pretty easy to exploit in any matchup. And I know he's had a couple one-catch games here and there, but it's felt like through whether he's in motion and catching screen passes or even getting handoffs in the backfield, he's always the one guy who consistently has a pretty significant role in the offense and always takes some attention away from the defense. But everybody else kind of seems to rotate in for their own big games when the matchup seems to dictate that.
All right, yeah, let's talk a little bit about some of the players that can create those matchup problems. So we've got Anthony Miller, we've got Tariq Cohen, we've got Trey Burton, and then also Taylor Gabriel's got some speed. So what are the qualities that made Anthony Miller, a day 2 prospect that made him kind of sad? I remember him getting round 1 steam. It's somebody I liked a lot coming into the draft. What are the qualities that make him that kind of receiver where he was coveted enough to be picked in the second round?
So he is a pretty top-notch route runner, even for a young player at this point in his career. And, he's not the biggest guy in 5'11", and he's also not the fastest, but he's got good speed. And he's got, he doesn't have a ton of size, but he is able to fight for balls in the air and go up and get them. So for the most part, you see him separate pretty well. And honestly, a lot of the problem has just been connecting with Trubisky. I mean, there have been multiple touchdowns left on the field where Miller is streaking down the middle of the field and Trubisky puts it up for him and just can't hit him. And they finally got that connection going a little bit more against the Lions. 5 catches, 122 yards and a touchdown. And we've seen flashes of it here and there for the course of the season, but maybe week 10 is kind of them getting that connection together, because you watch the All-22 and you just watch Anthony Miller every game. He is open so often, and the Bears just haven't been able to get the ball to him. He's still kind of the one part of their offense that before Detroit they hadn't really been able to tap into and hadn't been able to get, again, there would be their third wide receiver really going the way that they think he could. But like I said, Detroit could be that potential turning point for him if he and Trubisky are really on the same page. But again, if Trubisky goes into a bad game mode, then a lot of that then does tend to go out the window.
How would you compare? I mean, it's the guy that you're describing, Anthony Miller, sounds a lot like Stephon Diggs. How would you compare them?
I think that's not a bad. I mean, obviously, Anthony Miller is not up to, if you call him like a poor man's Stephon Diggs, I think that's not a bad comparison. I think there were some. I think the Antonio Brown came out a little bit as far as like a super high ceiling, but I don't think Miller has that much speed. But he is a guy that, just a crisp route runner, a playmaker who can surprise you a little bit with his ability to make plays after the catch. Although he is known to drop a few more passes than you'd like to see, and that's something that he did in college, and it is continuing, just kind of random concentration drops mixed in there as well. I think he single-handedly brought Trubisky to be tied for the drop rate, the best drop rate among quarterbacks now, when he long held the solo title. All
right. Let's talk a little bit about Trey Burton then. Tight end, been used a lot, kind of splitting out wide a lot. And, a tight end like that, it seems like you can help a young quarterback identify whether or not the team is in zone or man, because you can play him kind of out wide and see him play receiver. Moves in line. I'm not sure he's a great blocker, but they do have him block. He's a pretty phenomenal part of the Eagles' kind of Super Bowl run, and was considered kind of one of those, quality free agents where you're going to be able to negotiate a friendly salary for a player that seems to be super talented. What has his impact been? Am I completely wrong in my assessment? Has his impact been completely different? Is it better? Is it worse? What has his impact on the offense been?
No, I think you're largely on base there, and I think he's probably been. I don't want to call him the most disappointing of all the new additions, because I don't think it's not necessarily his fault. It's just that he hasn't gotten nearly as much run in the offense and being able to have as many opportunities to make plays downfield. I think he's catching a pretty high rate of his targets, but he's still, would be fourth on the team in targets, and he made plays in the red zone. Certainly, he's got 5 touchdowns, and they find different ways to work him in. But you look at a lot of his his stat lines for his games, and it kind of tells the story pretty much for him. I mean, he's got most of his games under 50 yards. I think he's 3 out of his 10 have been over 50, and it's usually that's kind of what he's been good for, is 3 catches for 30 yards or 3 for 40 or whatever, and that's been fine for the offense. But I think there was some hope and some expectation that maybe he could be even more than that, and we saw it against the Patriots. The 9 catches for 126 yards, where he was the receiver they wanted to match up in the passing game, and he just hasn't been that focal in the scheme, and so it's not his fault. I think he's done a good job for what he's been asked to do, but I guess I've been surprised that they haven't relied on him more, because I think they can get more out of him than what they have. So I guess in that sense, he's not disappointing, but I've been a little bit disappointed in his usage, because I think there's more there. I think he can be an even more dynamic weapon, be involved in this offense a little bit more, and so far it's been kind of spurts here and there.
It wasn't that long ago where tight ends getting 500 yards in a season was pretty good. 800 was usually kind of leading the league in yards. Right now we've got 3 tight ends, Zach Ertz, Travis Kelce, and George Kittle, that are basically going to hit 800 yards by week 11 or week 12. So it is kind of interesting. Trey Burton, 411 yards. I think 7 years ago, people would have been ecstatic. 411 yards, 5 touchdowns, would have been ecstatic. Now he's 10th in the league in among tight ends in receiving yardage. And that might even be kind of more impressive sounding than it is, because this year has been a surprisingly kind of thin year for tight ends, as I think fantasy players are pretty well aware. So does it feel weird that 400 yards from like 10 games in for a tight end is now disappointing, whereas kind of before that would have been, pretty good on pace for a tight end?
Yeah, I mean, he's already over almost 100 yards higher than his previous career high for a season. I mean, it's clearly he's taking. I mean, he's ready for this type of role. But yeah, it's a weird NFL now where like the George Kittle in his yards, he has like over 530 yards after the catch this season.
Yeah, and 535.
And I think so. I don't remember the exact stat, but they said like since 2006. That's the most yards after catch in a season for a tight end. That like only Rob Gronkowski has had a season with more yards after the catch for a tight end, and Kittle's already at that point after like 10 weeks of the season. It's such a weird tight end year right now, but George Kittle is absolutely killing it.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about Tariq Cohen. He might be the guy that scares me the most in this entire offense, and it's not as if he gets every single touch, right? You've got 2 running backs. One of them is nominally the starter. The other one is better, in my opinion. But Cohen is I don't think he's ever lived up to kind of his initial explosive spark plug type showing, but he's always been kind of dangerous. And I always feel like I'm always traumatized by the Vikings' history against receiving backs, guys with a ton of quickness that can match up well as route runners. Do you see him as more of a critical element to the offense? I mean, he like leads, like I said, the team in receptions. Do you see him as an outlet? Do you see him as kind of maybe a shiny toy, but not necessarily a critical element of the offense? How is he being used? How important is he to the offense? Does his usage maybe tell us a lot about Matt Nagy's scheme?
Yeah, he is, I think, the one engine that keeps the offense running. I mean, like you said, tied for the lead in catches, leads them in receiving yards and total yards from scrimmage, obviously, as well. And I think combined rushing and receiving touchdowns, he's tied with Jordan Howard. So yeah, he is the guy, like I said earlier, that it seems like every game he's the one consistent theme of like a player that gets his opportunities and is able to make a pretty positive impact. I think the Bills game was the only exception, but they didn't really need him to do much. And I guess earlier in the season against the Seahawks, he was taken out a little bit, but he's been a pretty consistent weapon for Trubisky. They move him around a ton. I mean, every snap he's lining up somewhere else, and most of the time he's the guy going in motion pre-snap, and they'll just do so many different things with him. And they'll give him a handful of carries, just enough that he's a breakaway threat on those, but he's never really going to be a real, hardcore rushing running back. He is a receiving weapon through and through. They like to use him to get matchups with particularly, linebackers and safeties that they feel like he can create separation from. And Trubisky's going to go to him a lot. I mean, he has consistently throughout the season, and I would expect even more of that. And he is the guy I think you should be the most scared of, just because there's so many things they can do with him, and they like to find a lot of different ways to get him involved. But like I said, I think to me it's more about trying to neutralize Trubisky rather than trying to find ways to neutralize Cohen.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about that offensive line, because you mentioned, if there's one way to kind of rattle Trubisky, it's with pressure. It's kind of where his signature poor games have come from. It comes with pressure. Right now, Trubisky has the 5th best pressure rate among quarterbacks. He's not getting pressured a ton. It goes Breeze, Roethlisberger, Brady, Flacco, Trubisky. It's a weird year. I mean, Andrew Luck is 6th. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. But at the same time, there's concerns on this offensive line, right? I mean, Kyle Long is injured. You have to play Brian Witzman, who's recently the 4th string guard for the Vikings. You're playing a rookie James Daniels, who a lot of people thought would be a center, but you've got Cody Whitehair at center. Charles Leno, people have been concerned about him for a while, but he seems to be playing better than that. Well, how do you feel about this offensive line going forward? Do you feel that pressure rate is indicative of the scheme, Trubisky, how well the offensive line protects? What is kind of the story behind it? How do you like that matchup against that Vikings defensive line?
it's always fun to, or I guess it's an interesting it's an interesting exercise to talk about offensive line because I feel like every team and every fan base feels like their own offensive line is bad, but every offensive line is, there's no overall great offensive line in the NFL at this point. There's just not enough offensive line talent. So, I think Bears fans would have some complaints at times about the line, but I think compared to a lot of the rest of the NFL, they should feel pretty fortunate about the guys that they do have, particularly in pass protection. I think the pressure rate is largely indicative of pretty good offensive line play. And, I think scheme is in there as well with some quick passes, but there's plenty of times when Trubisky puts more pressure on himself. You look like Pro Football Focus will assign sacks to the quarterback if it's his fault where he either holds onto the ball too long or tries to leave the pocket and runs into the arms of a defender instead of just throwing the ball away or trying to find a hot read. And Trubisky's been credited with 7 sacks this season, and the offensive line has been credited with 5. So I mean, a lot of it has been poor pocket presence against the blitz from Trubisky, and sometimes it's the blitz too, where the Bears have 5 blockers in there, and they're all blocking and they're all doing their job, but 6 or 7 guys are coming, and somebody comes in unblocked, and you can't blame the offensive line for that, and it results in pressure. So I think largely pass protection has been maybe even exceeding expectations for this offensive line, given the concerns about Bobby Massey at right tackle, and like you said, rookie James Daniels, and throwing Brian Witzman in there as well, who held up pretty well in pass protection, all things considered, from what you would expect from him. But the one area that this offensive line has been terrible is the run blocking. And, I know the running game in the NFL just isn't as important, and it's not playing a very big factor in the Bears' results. But I think the offensive line, more than anything, has been the reason Jordan Howard has struggled, and even Tariq Cohen hasn't gotten much going in the running game. They cannot create space up front. Nagy's been switching to some power schemes, some gap stuff. This is a zone blocking offensive line through and through. They kind of built them as a zone blocking team under John Fox in the previous regime, and you still have pretty much the same cast of starters, and when they try and run power and counter, it just doesn't work. I don't know why they keep trying to put Jordan Howard through that. It's been a weird year for Howard and this offensive line from a scheme standpoint and from a run blocking standpoint, but pass protection overall doing a very good job.
Howard was a zone runner in college, right? With Coleman or something like that. Yeah
at Indiana.
Yeah. So I'm taking a look. I was just thinking about this because I was looking at the Detroit Lions numbers, and Trubisky got assigned more hits and pressures than anyone on the offensive line in that game. But I was also thinking the Detroit Lions don't have a tremendously good pass rush. And then I looked through the schedule. There's not a lot of good pass rushes that the Bears have gone up against. Green Bay, Seattle, Arizona, Tampa Bay, Miami, New England, kind of, if you count Trey Flowers, but overall no. Maybe the Jets, Buffalo's on and off, and I already mentioned Detroit. Do you feel like maybe some of that might also be they haven't gone up against a defensive line like the Eagles or the Rams, the Vikings? Yeah,
for the most part. I mean, I think the Trey Flowers and the Patriots were able to do some things, and the Cardinals, I think their defense is a little bit underrated. But yeah, I agree. They haven't faced really a true top flight pass rushing team. And the Vikings might be the best group, certainly the best defensive line overall that the Bears will have faced this season.
All right, let's move to the other side of the ball. Talk about probably the top defense in the league right now, right? So I think by DVOA and by some advanced drive statistics, I think they're number 2 in takeaways. I think they're number 1 or number 2 in expected points allowed. Pretty good defense, it seems like. And I don't think it's all Khalil Mack either. I mean, you could talk about Akeem Hicks, who's been tremendous, but that secondary has been playing tremendously well. Kyle Fuller's the top-graded cornerback in the NFC North, the same NFC North that has the number 2 Jair Alexander. And then, of course, you've got Darius Slay and Xavier Rhodes. Prince Amukamara is allowing the fewest yards per snap in coverage on the team. Bryce Callahan is like second or third among nickel corners in yards allowed per coverage snap. Adrian Amos and Eddie Jackson are both, I think, Pro Bowl quality safeties that are playing at that level right now. How much of this defensive performance do you think has to do with the pressure they've been able to generate up front with Mack and Hicks? You've got a great nose tackle in Eddie Goldman. And how much do you think it has to do with the impressive play of a secondary that, I don't know, a lot of people would have put a lot of faith in them like 2 years ago had they known kind of who these players were?
So In my opinion, it's been largely pass rush and pressure based. That's been kind of what I've seen the correlation be. When Mac and rarely Floyd are getting pressure on the quarterback.
Oh yeah, I forgot to name one. Floyd.
Well, Floyd's had a terrible season. I mean,
Right.
up to this point, he got his first sack last week against the Lions, but really been the biggest disappointment anywhere on this team for the course of the year. But when Khalil Mack is on and they're really terrorizing opposing quarterbacks, it allows Kyle Fuller and Prince Mukamara, et cetera, to play a lot more aggressive. They don't have to watch out as much for double moves, for example, because they know that the quarterback's not going to have enough time for that play to fully develop to get to those guys downfield like that. So they can be more aggressive jumping on the first break of the receiver, or when they see a guy working over the middle, really coming downhill and not worrying about giving up anything behind them because that pass rush is coming closer. But when you saw Khalil Mack get hurt against the Dolphins and really do nothing against the New England Patriots despite being on the field, you saw the secondary, give up a ton of big plays to Brock Osweiler and certainly Tom Brady getting the Patriots offense moving pretty effectively in that game. And so the concern is that, well, when they don't have that pass rush, when they don't have Khalil Mack, they have been vulnerable. And to some extent, that's been a little bit of the story of Fuller's career as far as ups and downs, where he'll have games where he looks like a Pro Bowl player with a pick, and there's other games when he just gives up way too many big plays downfield, and you kind of wonder what the difference is from game to game. And we've seen a little bit of that with Prince Mukamara as well. Even last week against the Lions, I think he still gave up 8 catches for 70 yards or whatever on 10 targets. So there is some give and take there, and the Bears have let teams move pretty well in between the 20s, but they've been very good in the red zone. They've been generating those turnovers, and that pass rush has been, I think, the biggest key to it.
All right, well, let's talk about the pass rush then. So Khalil Mack, we had somebody write in and ask, do you think Khalil Mack is showing that he was worth the price they paid to get him? What does he have to do to either continue showing or fulfill, if he hasn't shown it yet, fulfill that hefty price?
So certainly through the first 4 games when he was in Chicago, he looked like Defensive Player of the Year and,
right, yeah,
and was
like
really
4 strip sacks, right?
Yeah, 4 strip sacks and a couple touchdowns in there as well. I mean, picks and forced fumbles and fumble recoveries, all that. Pretty much everything you could ask for an outside linebacker, he did in those first 4 games. Then they had the bye week 5, and then week 6 he gets hurt against the Dolphins and really doesn't do anything for the next 3 to 4 games. I don't think he did a crazy amount against the Bills, but really came back strong for sure against the Detroit Lions. And so when he has been totally healthy, well worth all the compensation, especially, when you look at, the Raiders draft picks versus the Bears draft picks and what they're kind of giving up and getting that second round pick in return. If the Raiders are going to be as bad as they are, that could end up being close to a first round pick in return as is. So right. I don't think you have any Bears fans regretting the trade or concerned about the compensation given up. He's looked every bit the part, deserving of every dollar when he's been healthy and on the field. And the injuries haven't been a concern for him throughout his career. I mean, this was his first ever missed game, was that Jets game in his whole career. So, yeah, only positivity and great news coming out of Khalil Mack in Chicago.
All right, let's talk about an underrated interior defensive lineman, Akeem Hicks. Is it fair to call him, because people have been calling him underrated for a while now. It seems that we always bring him up as underrated. But then again, when we list the top defensive tackles or interior defenders in the NFL, he never comes up, right? Aaron Donald, maybe if you want to throw a nose tackle in there, Linval Joseph, but it seems like he doesn't show up. Is he underrated? Is he genuinely good? Is he enabled by the scheme around him? What's the straight talk on him?
The underrated conversation is interesting because you're right. There's a contingency of people that have been calling him underrated for years, and I think accurately so. And when you hear that over and over again, it loses some of that right. power behind it. But I think nationally he is underrated. The average Madden player at home maybe knows who he is. They'd probably know who Aaron Donald is. They'd probably know Fletcher Cox. Some of these other top defensive linemen. But Hicks, doesn't seem to quite enter that conversation. And, I think part of it is that he does make a lot of big plays in the running game, and he hasn't put up huge sack numbers, especially that some of these other top interior linemen have. I mean, I think he had 8.5 last year, which was a career high and probably about as many as you can ask for Hicks. And he's got 3 this year, which is pretty good. And so if people weren't going to notice his 8.5 last year, I don't think you're going to notice his sacks moving forward. But he is so dominant against the run so you can count on him for 1 or 2 plays a game where from the snap he just completely swims the lineman and is standing in the backfield before the running back gets the ball and then just gets to swallow him up for a free tackle for a loss and holds his gaps so consistently. And then he adds the pass rush on top of that. And as far as the Khalil Mack effect on that, I'm not sure how much of a difference that's actually had on Hicks. I mean, A, he was great before Khalil Mack got here, and B, Hicks does a lot of just kind of one-on-one with the guard. And sometimes if a team sends the guard to go help Khalil Mack, then maybe he can get a leverage on a center coming to try and block him. And I think there's some of that, but for the most part, this is just a guy that has the same matchups he's always had and just wins them against lower quality interior offensive linemen.
All right, one last player I'm going to ask for an in-depth answer for, and then I'm going to need one-sentence answers for my curiosity, mostly because the rest of the players I'm going to ask about are probably not important. But we need to know about how Roquan Smith is playing. Didn't start the year as a starter, primarily because he missed a lot of time because he was holding out, rightfully so, in my opinion. The Bears were screwing him, man. But he's on the field. People have been talking about how he's been playing pretty well, but I never get any details. It's all kind of generically, oh, he's playing well. And of course, his first action, right, I think was nationally televised, and it was like a sack, like his first snap, or something like that.
Of Aaron Rodgers, yes.
Yeah, right, exactly. Not a bad way to start. But I just get that he's playing well. What is he doing? Is he playing well? Are we just assuming he is? What's the deal?
Well, I do think sometimes we have, we as in the general public, certainly not myself, I would never make this mistake, but certainly
I am not subject to any cognitive biases.
Yes, so, but certainly some people conflate a high amount of tackles with good linebacker play,
right? Yeah.
Which sometimes is the case and sometimes isn't. Like 2 games ago against the Bills, he had 12 tackles, a career high, and he's around the ball on every play. But if you look a little bit further, he was targeted 11 times and allowed 11 catches for 100 yards in that game. So
boy. That's very Chad Greenway of him.
Yeah,
I just have to throw the.
And you look at like his tackles in the running game; it's like 7 yards, 6 yards, 9 yards downfield. I mean, those 12 tackles were not high quality tackles. So, right. There's been some give and take with him. He's playing like a fine, average starting quality inside linebacker, which I think is a pretty good mark for a linebacker in his rookie year. And I'm still waiting for him to really emerge as that, elite athlete, top 10 pick playmaker. I mean, you see the athleticism on the field for sure, and
right.
It's helped him chase down running backs and make some plays, but still in his rookie year, he hasn't looked dominant at any point in the stretch, and that's totally fine. There's been maybe a few more missed tackles than you'd like to see, and some of those coverage lapses like I talked about, and still kind of the scouting report on him is that he can't engage and shed and stack blocks that effectively, but he is good at running around them, and that's kind of what we've seen at the NFL level here. So he's playing well. He's not playing great, and that's, I guess, about what you should expect from the 8th overall pick that didn't get training camp, so kind of came in late and has had to learn on the fly.
All right, so 2 sentences on guys I was interested in the draft at some point, or I am surprised to find are on an NFL roster. So 1, how is Kevin White playing?
Not well, and as of lately,
Rough. Not
at all. He was inactive for the last 2 games.
Losing snaps to Josh Bellamy or something?
Yeah, he caught that Hail Mary, and people were like, "Oh, is that changing the game?" But he can't separate as a route runner at all, and he's just been a healthy scratch.
Fake 4.35. Chase Daniel, why does he get so much money? Who is he? What's the deal?
So they'll potentially sneak out this. They run a trick play. They called it Willy Wonka, where they put both quarterbacks on the field, and.
Right.
And like they fake an option read to Chase Daniel, and for some reason the defense follows him and then leaves Tariq Cohen going the opposite direction. But Chase Daniel was signed because he is a good mentor. He is a smart quarterback, and he knows Matt Nagy's offense. So he is, and their quarterbacks coach is a holdover from the previous staff. And Nagy built a staff of assistants that didn't know the offense. So Daniel was the the coach on the sideline, the mentor for Trubisky. And I think you ask anybody on the Bears, he has been well worth every penny.
Did you know that Benny Cunningham was on the Bears roster?
He doesn't get enough run, if you ask me. He's a great special teams player for them and great pass protector. And he was more of a third down back last year under John Fox, but they haven't been giving him any love. And I think he's a better player than he's gotten to get.
Adam Shaheen hasn't really seen the field, but yeah, what have you seen of him?
Well, he landed on injured reserve before the season started and is eligible to come off and has been practicing the last 2 weeks. And there's some suspicion that he'll make his season debut against the Vikings here in this game. Maybe he'll wait till Thanksgiving against the Lions. 85 hours after this game is supposed to be done, the Bears have to play again, which is always fun. So
happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah. So I wouldn't expect a ton from Shaheen at this point, but I think everyone's still kind of looking for him to take that next step. But the development has been slowed because of injury.
Shaheen and Burton might be the two oldest young tight ends in the league. Although I guess with what Jordan Akins in Houston and Grandpa over in Baltimore, who knows now. But sorry, I'm awful. Okay, defensive players I'm interested in. Aaron Lynch, is he real?
For a little while, he looked real. And there's still he is a real rotational outside linebacker for sure. Okay. He's a good number 3 who can play the run and pass rush pretty well. But it's a 1-year deal. He has an injury history. I'm not sure where exactly he goes from here, and I don't necessarily trust him yet if I'm a team looking for a full-time starting outside linebacker. But yeah, a nice rebound for him this year.
Bilal Nichols, worth a 5th-round pick?
He might be the steal of the Bears draft class this year, at least at this point. I think he's Pro Football Focus's second highest graded rookie defensive lineman. He
get
is.
Out of here.
Yeah, no, he is. It's Deshaun Hand 1. It's Bilal Nichols 2.
Dope.
And Nichols has been just lights out. I mean, as far as a 5th-round rookie, he might be their third best defensive lineman right now. I mean, it's Hicks, Goldman, and then probably Bilal Nichols. And he's setting the edge versus the run and getting penetration. He's mixing some pass rush in there as well. And maybe we inflated a little bit because he's a 5th-round pick. So everything he does feels great and is a nice bonus, but nothing but impressive from Bilal Nichols.
See, I was looking at that draft. I was thinking Kylie Fitz going to be the steal of the draft. I loved Kylie Fitz coming out. Wait, how's he doing?
He has played 43 snaps in 2 games, I think, total. Got some run against the Bills in the blowout and has yet to produce anything. Still a very, very raw pass rusher. Didn't like what I saw in the preseason.
Wow, okay. Well, Stephen Weatherly took 3 years to be good. Kylie Fitz, also 6th-round pick. It'll be fine. All right, score predictions. What do you think? Bears favored, I think, by 2.5. It's at home. Vikings historically underperform at Soldier Field, both by point differential and win total. But I don't know. Mitch Trubisky is fake, right? So, what's your final analysis?
Just don't put any defensive backs on the left side of the field. Put everybody on the right. It'll be fine.
Wait, okay. No, I need to ask about this. When I put that take out there, that Mitch Trubisky, maybe I overstated it, can't throw left, but the take really should have been Mitch Trubisky has shown neither a proclivity nor talent for throwing left for a year and a half. Well, I mean, what was your reaction to that?
I think that was a stronger case last year for his rookie season, but we've seen him be able to throw left pretty well. He certainly doesn't. He prefers to throw right, and from a tendency standpoint, it's middle of the field and right a lot. I mean, you can pretty well predict that a lot of his passes are going right, but from a production standpoint, he's been able to hit on throws left pretty well. I would love to go.
Of the season, he also wasn't throwing left. I'm just saying, first 3 weeks of the season.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I think that the trend has regressed a little bit.
But the meme is dead, right? He tried to kill it against Tampa Bay. Everyone was like, "Well, Tampa Bay, whatever." Then he just kept doing it, and even against the Lions, he did it a couple of times. So,
but I would be curious to I haven't really dove deep in the PFF database on his most inaccurate throws. I would be curious as to what side of the field they're on.
Me, man.
Because
send it to me in a DM or something. I need this.
Anecdotally, it does feel like a lot of the passes that he just sails and misses an open receiver. It feels like from memory that maybe a little bit more left than right, but I don't have the full numbers to back that up just yet.
Yeah, I mean, you should have seen me backpedal in my head. I mean, obviously, I didn't do this on Twitter because that would have been embarrassing. But The first time he threw left, it was an impressive throw. I was like, it was a rollout. He's good throwing on the run. So it just in the pocket throwing left. That makes no sense. And then he goes, Tampa Bay. I'm like, the Tampa Bay is, not a defense that's worth considering. They're, a college defense or whatever, right? So I just did all sorts of backpedaling, but luckily I didn't put too much of that onto the timeline. And I just kind of let the process play itself out. Okay, so now, actually, score prediction.
I was surprised that Vegas had the Bears as favorites. And I understand they're at home and that they're the first place in the NFC North, but it really doesn't feel to me like the Bears are the favored team. Like I feel like the Vikings should win this game. I think the Bears have had a lot of ups and downs, particularly as their quarterback has gone up and down. And I think the Vikings are a more stable team than the Bears are, despite the Vikings having some instability of their own. And I just feel like as much as the Vikings defense is gonna really get in Trubisky's head, and I know the Bears pass rush shouldn't have too much trouble with the Vikings offensive line, which really has struggled. Mm-hmm. But Kirk Cousins is so much a better quarterback under pressure than Trubisky is, and I think ultimately that might be what this game comes down to. So I think it's going to end up being a little bit of a lower scoring game, a little bit more of a defensive struggle than some of the big point outcomes we've seen. So I was thinking a tight one, maybe a late field goal decides it. 24-23 Vikings, maybe 24-21, something right in that low 20s range with the Vikings winning by a field goal or less.
Everybody I've talked to has taken the under in this game. And, it's your second prediction was the under. So I find that really interesting, too. Okay. Player who scares you the most in the Vikings could be Adam Thielen, could be Stephon Diggs, could be Danielle Hunter, could be Linval Joseph, could be, Kirk Cousins, someone I haven't named yet. Who scares you the most?
The easy one is Adam Thielen, but I'm a little bit more concerned about Danielle Hunter. I think the pass rush is going to be more critical to what Trubisky can do. I think the Bears have ultimately kind of lived and died by how much their quarterback can carry them against the higher quality opponents. And the Vikings are not a team where the Bears defense can will them. I personally, I don't think the Bears defense can will them to a win. So, Danielle Hunter going up against Charles Leno on that left side, I think will be a great matchup. And if Everson Griffin is back to what he has been as of late and not what he was earlier, him versus Bobby Massey, those edge rushers scare me a little bit more.
All right. Last gambling-ish related question. Over under total quarterback fumbles in this game. I'll put it at 3.5. Do you take the under or the over?
That's a good number. Because when I was thinking 3 initially when you said that, so I'm going to take the under, but I think maybe if you combine interceptable passes and fumbles, I think you're going to be pushing 6-7.
Wow, what a game, man. All right, thanks for coming on, dude. This has been great. Appreciate it. Love picking your brain. Normally, I don't get knowledgeable Bears guests. That has not been true the past 2 years. And I don't mean the Bears guests we've brought on haven't been knowledgeable. I mean, we just haven't been able to get guests. So, really,
I'm better than nothing. Thank you.
You're right. Yeah. No, you've cleared the bar of nothing. And I really appreciate you coming on. One of my favorite conversations every year. We'll probably have you on for the next Bears thing, unless, I don't know, you just want to piss me off the next couple of weeks. Or vice versa, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, is there anything you want to plug for heading out?
No, I'll just mention again the Locked On Bears podcast for more of that. And, NBC Sports Chicago, Bears Wire, and I'm sure you plug Pro Football Focus enough to do my job for me.
Right, yeah. Big Pro Football Focus stand over here. All right. Thanks so much for coming on. That's been Lorin Cox. Follow him on Twitter at CoxSports1, one of the best Twitter handles I have ever seen.
No one ever gets it, and I've been.
What do you mean no one? It's so good.
I'm like it's like Fox Sports 1 with a C, and people go, oh, that makes sense. That's clever. I'm like, well, clearly it wasn't because you didn't get it.
All right, man. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Well, let's go to the mailbag. And the first question is from Candace Hare, who asks, how do the Vikings limit Tariq Cohen's big play potential?
This is tough. I actually basically asked Lorin that in the interview you just heard. He's the guy that scares me the most. And the trying to limit him is going to be kind of one of the key tasks, because he's like tied for the lead in receptions on the team. One approach could be kind of the Marshall Faulk approach that Bill Belichick had way back in 2001 against the Rams, where you just hit him on every play, whether or not he gets the ball. That would be kind of fun to bring that back, because it really disrupts the rhythm of the offense. Because, as Lorin said, Cohen might actually be the engine of this really unique, Nagy run offense. And so it might really, cripple them if he's, out of rhythm, out of sorts, and doesn't really have the ability to get into his routes or whatever. And he's not a great pass protector. They don't ask him to pass protect all that often. But if you can do that while also getting pressure on the quarterback, they might have to just keep him in there, or just put Jordan Howard in there instead. If that's not going to be the plan, then it becomes kind of difficult, because he can dice zones apart by finding seams really quickly and getting the ball really quickly, and he's faster than almost anyone who's going to follow him in man coverage. If this is the Anthony Barr that was just coming out of the draft, I would feel actually pretty comfortable with him chasing Tariq Cohen down the field. But even though Barr is like more athletic than most linebackers, and Kendricks is more athletic than most linebackers, that is a difficult task for them to live up to, especially as he kind of releases downfield. So beyond that, it might have to be, constantly kind of bracketing him, kind of understanding that as he moves through zones, the zones themselves have to shift. And that, I think, might be a good way to kind of diminish a lot of the Bears' offense overall, especially because I think that despite the talent of like Trey Burton and Allen Robinson and even Taylor Gabriel, I think that you can man up against them and kind of keep them a little bit contained. It's Tariq Cohen that's kind of concerning. So that's kind of the $1 million question. I don't know exactly what the entire answer is. I'm partial to the what did he call it? The bullseye strategy that was used in that famous Super Bowl against the Rams that I guess helped start the Patriots dynasty. But maybe that's just too like romantic, wishful thinking.
You've never been accused of that before in your life.
Yeah, right.
Kenneth Allen asks, what is the realistic best case scenario for the offensive line versus Chicago? And how worried about Khalil Mack are you in particular?
I'm terrified of Khalil Mack. So he hasn't been healthy for a good chunk of the games. I think he missed 2 games, and then 2 other games he wasn't playing at full health. I think that's the Miami game and the New England game. But in the games where he has been healthy, he's been a terror. I think he's gotten a sack in every one of those games, and certainly he's gotten a pretty tremendous amount of pressure. So that's pretty concerning. You can even see kind of the splits a little bit when you look at how quarterbacks have played, not even counting sack yards, just adjusted yards per attempt. No sack yards, no sacks in the attempts denominator. And quarterbacks have played above their level of play in games where Khalil Mack has been out or injured, and have played below their average level of play by a pretty significant margin in games, kind of otherwise. So he can have a pretty tremendous impact on the game. The thing about this game is that there's probably going to be a lot of quarterback fumbles, because Trubisky fumbles the ball a lot, Cousins fumbles the ball a lot, Khalil Mack is great at strip sacks. I'm worried about that. The Bears are number 2 in the takeaway column, and Khalil Mack is a big part of that. He had 4 strip sacks at the beginning of the year, plus an interception. If you force pressure, you create an interception. So, yeah, I'm pretty scared. You're going to need David Morgan to be healthy and have him pretty consistently chipping in help, because as much as Brian O'Neill has improved, it's Khalil Mack. So yeah, it's tough.
Who is the most important piece coming back to this game?
Presumably on the Vikings. I guess Stephon Diggs. Missing him, I think the impact was pretty keenly felt. I'm not going to say that the entire reason that Adam Thielen had 22 yards was because, Diggs was out. I think it played a role. I think another thing that played a role is that the Vikings were just whipping the Lions, so you didn't need to pass the ball as much. So, and there are other factors at play, obviously. But I think that he's kind of enabled the passing game in a way that is sometimes kind of hidden. And with Adam Thielen a little bit banged up, right? Diggs being at full health or near full health or whatever that looks like, might be kind of a tremendous gain for the offense. Obviously, having potentially Tom Compton back, we'll see about that. Anthony Barr was limited. Having him back might be big, especially because he offers a lot more in the running game than Eric Wilson does. Those are all pretty important. And what happens at cornerback, it's going to end up being important. Sendejo, Harris, the drop off isn't as large and might even, one could argue, I don't know, that it could be an improvement to have Harris in there. I don't have a strong opinion on that right now, but it's pretty clear that they're at least close. So I would say having Stephon Diggs back is a pretty big thing to have back.
Jack Viking asks, how well do you think turnovers trend, or do they revert to a percentage of the mean? Bears plus 13, Vikings evenish. I doubt the turnover betting line would be Bears -2 or even -1. Any data study on that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, so I've kind of looked into this in the paddling the way past, way back when Brian Burke was running the Advanced Football Analytics blog. I think they called it advancedfootballstats.com back then. And the evidence suggests that teams who are kind of leading in the turnover column will continue to produce more turnovers than the average team, but will not produce them at nearly the rate that they were for the first half of the season. And I think that's been true for nearly every single year that they looked at, except I think the 2011 Bears of all teams, who just crushed it in the turnover category under a Tampa 2 defense. But yeah, it's tough to maintain a really high level of turnover play. Obviously, people remember that with the 5-0 Vikings, but it is indicative of an ability that generally persists over time over other defenses. So defenses that are good at turnovers tend to continue to be good at turnovers. Defenses that are extremely good at turnovers, like the Bears are right now, do not tend to be extremely good at turnovers. They just tend to be very good at turnovers. So yeah, there's going to be probably some regression. But it's still going to be a defense that's going to be more opportunistic than most. Plus, the reason a lot of turnovers happen on good defenses, I guess last year's Vikings kind of excluded I think they ranked 22nd in turnover rate, is because by being a good defense, you put them in situations or put them in like under pressure where they are more likely to, or the offense is more likely to create turnovers. So even if they're not a ball hawking defense, creating 3rd and long or the types of skills that make you a good defense, like close coverage, just create more opportunities for turnovers to occur. So yeah, it's somewhat persistent, but yeah, you would expect regression.
Next question is from Luke Braun, who asks, of the backups who have seen significant playing time on defense, this would include Weatherly, Wilson, Hill, Harris, and Curse, who has the highest chance of being a starter long-term on the Vikings?
That's really interesting. I like Harris and Hill for that. I think Wilson is a super sub or a really interesting package player. You could maybe, instead of like a big nickel with Curse, you could have Wilson in there. I guess it's base, but you have him play kind of a nickel-ish role or a safety-ish role, have him play a little bit more off the ball. But he's played really tremendously well in coverage, but he's playing extremely poorly against the run. So, I would say that it's probably not Wilson. Holton Hill has been playing really, really well over the past 200 snaps. And he might even lead the Vikings in like yards per snap and coverage allowed among all cornerbacks. So that's pretty tremendous and impressive. Plus he's got turnover. But Harris has been on the team for longer and has been consistently the option that they've turned to over the past couple of years. When Sendejo's missed a game because of suspension or an injury or whatever. So I think it might be Harris, especially because Holton Hill not only has to kind of overcome, Trey Waynes, but also potentially, maybe Mackenzie Alexander improves or Mike Hughes is still going to be there. And so you have to deal with that. Whereas Sendejo doesn't have any dead cap space or anything like that. But he also doesn't cost that much. So you could either cut him and it doesn't hurt you too much, or you could just have a kind of expensive, extremely good backup safety. So I'm going to go with Anthony Harris.
All right, next question is from Dex, who asks, do you think Eric Wilson has shown enough in the past couple of weeks to continue to see the field at times after Barr is healthy?
Yeah, I think so. Like I said, he's played really well as a coverage linebacker. He's played so Barr has played actually really tremendously well in coverage this year too, except everyone kind of remembers the Todd Gurley touchdown or him trailing a receiver in situations where linebackers are expected to make plays. Aside from that Gurley touchdown, Barr has been remarkably good, and Wilson has been a little bit better even in coverage. He's kept really, really close to tight ends and man coverage. He's done a great job in closing down running backs. He's really just gifted in coverage, it seems like. He might be one of the better coverage linebackers based off of what we've seen in the past couple of games. So small sample and everything. One of the better coverage linebackers already in the NFL. But because he's such a tremendous liability against the run, and because like the Vikings as a defense kind of orient themselves philosophically in stopping the run first, it would be difficult for him to see the field a lot outside of, say, third down situations. And they were using him in third down situations before Barr was injured. They'd line up Barr on the edge and have like a 5-man front, and then they put Wilson in there. So you'd have 3 linebackers, but it's like you're exclusively your coverage linebacker. So we'll see him going forward, and he's really kind of earned additional playing time in like the vaguest sense. Whether or not he's earned additional playing time versus, say, Anthony Barr is there or J-Ron Curse is playing, that remains to be seen because they're both playing well. But abstractly, he's played well enough to earn more playing time.
Don from Ohio asks, can the Vikings realistically make the playoffs if they go 1-3 in the next 4 games and the only win is against New England?
Realistically, no. Statistically, yeah. I guess. What kind of question is this, man? You already know the answer, and it's just depressing anyway.
That's kind of the whole point of being a Vikings fan, isn't it?
And the whole point of Don from Ohio.
Yeah, probably. Also from Don, if Trubisky throws 5 touchdowns versus the Vikings on Sunday night, and all the touchdowns are thrown to the left side of the field, do we charge Arif with felony fraud?
Yes, but if he throws a 6th touchdown and it's to the right, I'm acquitted.
That seems totally fair.
Yeah.
The law would be on your side.
Yeah.
HVAC repairman, would the Vikings have a better record if Donut Club was replaced by Pasta Club? And who would the leaders of Pasta Club be?
Answer, no. And who would the leaders of Pasta Club be? I would have picked Brian Robinson. Man, all these like fun offbeat questions, they answer very often as Brian Robinson. But he's not here, man.
He's here in spirit, and that's what's really important.
I'm choking up. I don't know.
I don't know. Who remember
Cousins.
You. Okay.
Cousins would be the leader of the White Bread Club, I guess. The Wonder Bread Club. But yeah, I'll pick Cousins for now.
There's a terrible joke in there, but I'm not touching it. Logan asks our final question, he says, I know you believe turkey is trash. We will talk all about turkey next week. If you could restart Thanksgiving holiday traditions, which meat would you recommend?
I think ham is great. I think ham is underrated. I think people don't have good ham, or they just very often think it's like the deli ham. And by deli ham, I mean ham that they bought at a grocery store labeled deli slice. But really good ham is extraordinary. So I would say probably that. But if it has to be a bird, I mean, chicken is delicious, guys. Why can't it just be a chicken?
Now, for those that are new to this whole thing, Arif believes that turkey is a trash bird.
Knows that turkey is a trash meat. As a bird, I've got no opinions. But it's a trash meat, and it does not deserve its hallowed place in food tradition in the United States. Benjamin Franklin was right. It should have been the national bird. That way we wouldn't kill it and eat it. Speaking
of the national bird, there's an influx of bald eagles in the on the way to where I work. So every morning, usually I'm seeing like some Nature Channel situation of just rodents getting picked up by bald eagles. I really think we should just start eating bald eagles at this point. I feel like that's the next step in all of this.
I mean, there's a lot of people who live near bald eagles that would be for it, because like the restrictions against, because bald eagles are untouchable and they do tremendous damage in areas where people can't like control the bald eagle population. So, I mean, I'm not against that experiment, but it does seem like the libs are at it again. They want us to eat bald eagles. They literally are eating America. And it's like, well, maybe it's not the right time to discuss eating bald eagles.
We can't eat the flags. So we're going to do the next thing. We're just going to eat eagles.
Right. No, we'll eat the eagles, but they'll be cooked via the burning from the flags. So I got political pretty fast. Not really. That's a fake politics.
I was going to say.
I've upset the pro bald eagle faction.
I was going to say something about sticking to sports, and I can't. I'm speechless. Congratulations. I'm speechless. So that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. We'll be back next week to talk about the game and talk about Green Bay as well. So that's going to be it. Arif, what do you have to plug?
I've got a preview piece of the Bears coming up on The Athletic. You can see my most recent piece. I think it's still the one on Daniil Hunter. And I'm going to have a piece on a player to be named as well as Kirk Cousins on The Athletic kind of coming soon.
And again, we are looking for your opinion on the whole potential ads thing. You can send an email to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com or just send us a tweet at norsecodedn and just let us know what you think. We are looking for your feedback. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember to tweet that, even if it is a work in progress. And we will see you next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at norsecodedn. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/norsecode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/norsecode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.